right, coming to you live from the Alienware Training Facility in sunny Santa Monica, California. We're going to be talking about some Mythic Plus changes. As you can see on screen right here, Blizzard has posted hotfix notes regarding Dungeons Mythic Plus. We also have some class tuning to discuss, and just in general, how Season 3, Week 1 Mythic Plus has been going. Blizzard actually kind of slammed down some pretty significant changes to a couple of dungeons where Streets of Wonder, Streets timer has now been increased to 34 minutes, was previously 32 minutes, which 2 minutes is a huge deal. I remember Darkflame Cleft, I think, last season got 2 minutes off their timer. 2 minutes off a timer, or 2 minutes onto a timer, is a huge buff or nerf in whatever direction. The fact that Streets got 2 more minutes makes that dungeon much, much easier. I've had similar situations to most people where you feel like you're playing fairly clean and you still deplete Streets to the timer. So 2 minutes on top of that, that's going to be nice. Commander Zofar, this is the mini boss that is right in front of the final boss. The shock mine duration has been reduced by 33%, and lethal force now only lasts 3 seconds. Now, Commander Zofar also, this isn't part of the patch notes, because why would it be? He now has an increased aggro radius, which means that a jump skip that players were previously doing on Zofar to not play him, he now needs to be played more frequently. It kind of calls into question, are you supposed to play him solo versus with trash? Or, at some point you might be looking to play with him with trash. At the same time as well, if you're playing with like a hunter or a rogue, you can snap up trash to the last boss. I don't really know what's going to go on with just the strategy in there. But yeah, Zofar now being a more reasonable mob makes sense. The shock mine duration being reduced by 33% is nice, because there's a problem with Zofar where if you were pulling him, you would just basically clutter up all of your play area. And it just made the game pretty tough. So I think that this is pretty reasonable. If you're if you're Blizzard, it's not even necessarily that he was undoable and not worth the count. It was more just he's a pain in the ass. And so yeah, this is fine. Pierce, this I believe is an ability from a Cartel Wise guy. The damage amp has now been increased to 10%, was previously 20. I think these are from the mobs that are on the right side after the. Oh, they're from the Overseers. Okay, yeah. So these are the mobs that are on the right side after the first boss area. So these are mobs that people aren't largely pulling. A lot of people are going left. If you're going right, this is totally fine. In addition to that, there's Mize's Oasis stuff, where Final Warning now pulses AoE damage for every second until the barrier was destroyed. Okay. So the problem with Final Warning, just in general, was that it was a 40 million damage hit that in theory you could DR if you had Mass Barrier, Anti-Magic Zone, Personals, everything, basically. But the problem is there was no recourse if you ever dropped your damage amp on this fight, and if you didn't do the target minigame perfectly, it was just completely boned. So I think that making it a pulsing AoE damage where you're allowed some level of recovery is actually pretty good. The Brawling Patrons throw drink, which this is the green swirly. The damage has been reduced by 50%. Now the issue is that whenever you're doing the target dash minigame, you can just dash straight into a green swirly and get one shot by it. I'm not sure if a 50% damage nerf stops you from getting one shot. If it does, that's great. Intuitively, I felt like I always got completely annihilated by these, so it's one of those things that's pretty tough. All right, for Halls of Atonement, we have a couple of very minor changes. Inquisitor's Cigar's display power radius is now 5 yards, was previously 10. Okay, I'm going to be honest. If I was going to nerf Halls of Atonement, I would have maybe nerfed the trash count required in Halls of Atonement. It feels a bit egregious that you need every mob from the first area to be able to complete the dungeon. I understand. I've seen the complaints about this dungeon. I tend to agree. At the same time, this is probably a fine change. I never really had an issue with Inquisitor Cigar circles, but I also play ranged DPS. I bet if you play a bunch of melee, this mechanic was annoying. Lord Chamberlain's Erupting Torment damage is now reduced by 22%, and a radius is reduced to 10 yards, was previously 14. So these are the big circles that are on this fight. Damage being reduced by 22% means that tanks and DPS Death Knights probably can stand in this circle, and every other melee DPS and every other DPS is going to have to move out. I actually think that reducing this to 10 yards is fine. It's one of those things that it feels terrible as just a mechanic whenever your melee have to completely run off the boss. Other things, I'm not shocked that they ended up nerfing Streets. But looking at this Archon list in terms of dungeon ease as to what the max key is and completion metrics with how subcreation used to work, Streets is one of the only dungeons that hasn't been done on a 16. Maybe 50% of them, or a little bit over 50% of them, have been done on a 16. Most people are struggling in Streets a lot more so than they are in other runs, just generally speaking. a lot of it came down to the timer. I actually don't think that Streets as a whole is that hard, but I do think it has two things that are going against it. First off, people don't really want to do it. People don't like 5-boss dungeons. It's long. And then, you know, I understand why they decreased it to 32 minutes. Blizzard thought that with the RP reduction, it was going to be fine at 32 minutes. It was not. It needed 34 minutes. So I think that nerfing it, especially whenever you're looking at some of the metrics as to how hard it is, makes a little bit more sense. Beyond that, I'm not super shocked about difficulty of dungeons this season. I do think that Ecodome Aldani has actually been picked up by players a lot more than I kind of would have expected. People are actually doing a pretty good job there. So for class tuning, it was pretty sparse. They did buff Fire Mage. Fire Mage is playing a Flame Strike oriented build in Mythic Plus, and they have all damage increased by 4%. I don't know if this brings Fire Mage better than, say, Frost. It definitely is not better than Arcane. It's not even a question. I still am skeptical about it being better than Frost, particularly for 5-man content. It's looking pretty good in Raid, though. I don't think this really matters. Ret Paladin, all damage increased by 5%. It's kind of interesting. Ret Paladin was actually decent in Mythic Plus, I would say. Not a big problem. Affliction Warlock. Affliction is the best Warlock specialization. Them getting nerfed by 3% is a little bit weird. I think that Destro can be better than AF in some situations, just, you know, due to target count, pull count stuff. But I think that, you know, and then Arms getting 8%. The spec is the worst spec in the game. You know, it wasn't the worst spec in the game by 8%. It was the worst spec in the game by 28% or something. Like, this spec is bad. Probably still going to be bad. Probably still worse than Fury even. So they buffed a bunch of. I think that AF is probably the most likely candidate to see some, you know, third DPS consideration in Mythic Plus, and them getting nerfed is a little bit unfortunate. These other DPS, I think Ret Paladin buffs are probably the ones that are the best slated towards maybe making them more meta in Mythic Plus. But even still, I don't think the Ret Paladin was like doing insane damage or anything. This probably goes from being a good specialization to a slightly better specialization, not like a great specialization to like an OP one or anything like that. All right, beyond that, that's pretty much it for all these Mythic Plus changes that we've been seeing this week, and I will see you guys in the next video.